All right, everybody, welcome to a race analysis with a special guest today, Keegan Swenson. How you doing, Keegan?
Good. How you guys doing?
Doing well. We're going to look at your Carson City off-road performance from today, or I should say from this past weekend. I was there at the race, however, I only rode a portion of the course. You guys racing on Sunday, and you ended up actually taking second place in a 3-up sprint with Ben Sontag and Howard Grotz. So kudos on that.
Thanks.
Before we get into, so we're going to look at your power file and we're going to use TrainerRoad's performance analytics, obviously, to do that. But before we do that, I want to talk about your, I guess, more equipment strategy and how you fueled that day. So first, I guess, run me through which bike you ran, which tires you chose, and anything else that was unique about your bike for this race.
Yeah. So I raced the Pivot Less 29, which is, and it's just a basic hardtail. And I always use a dropper post on it. So that wasn't special to this race or anything. That was just what I do. And that's just the way it's set up.
Nice.
My fork setup was the same as it always is. I run the Fox Stepcast 32 with 2 volume reducers at around 75 PSI. And then I ran the Maxxis Aspen Exo 2.25 tires. And I used those. I used 20 in the front and 21 in the back.
Okay.
So I kind of figured there wasn't any hard G outs or anywhere that I was going to really rim out on this course. So I wouldn't air it on a bit of a softer side just because it was kind of sandy. And also on the hardtail, it helps make the bike a little bit more comfortable having that little bit lower pressure in the back. So
yeah, that makes sense. So, and I should clarify, you ride for the Stan's Pivot team, correct?
Yep.
So that's so you had choices between the hardtail, full suspension, everything else, and you chose that hardtail.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So I guess running off of that, what power meter were you running, and then what head unit were you running?
A Stages XTR power meter.
Okay.
On the left side, and then a Stages Dash head unit.
Cool. And then what gearing were you running for this course?
So I ran a 36 tooth single ring up front with a 1140 XTR cassette in the back. We're on XTR Di2. So
okay, gotcha. So what made you go for that choice to go with, I guess, that gearing? Because that's a wider spread than some might use at certain points, but obviously it's not the 1146 that Shimano has. What made you choose that gearing in the front ring?
I just always use that the XTR cassette. So that's just kind of my go-to. And in the front, I do like the bigger chainring if possible, like as long as there's nothing super steep and long on the course. Like I think I like the way the bigger chainring pedals. And then it's also nice to have the bigger gear, right? I mean, whether it's a sprint or if you're just like going descending, like I think as long as you don't need the little gear, you might as well go bigger. And then for the crit, you have to race exactly the same bike aside from tires.
Yeah.
So even chainring. So it's definitely an added bonus. If you can get away with using the big chainring in the backcountry race, then it's really nice to have that 36 for the crit because they're always flat and fast pretty much. So it's good to have the gearing.
Epic Rides races, they always have these fat tire crits for the pros, right? We should probably explain that. That happens on the Friday before, and then you have Saturday off, and then Sunday you do the backcountry race, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Yep,
so then
correct.
You can just change tires, I think, for the fat tire crit.
Yep, your bike has to stay exactly the same, aside from tires. So for the crit, I use the Maxxis Refuse 40C tire, which is just a big old slick, and it's really fun. So
nice, awesome. Do you change like pressure or anything else for those fat tire crits? Like, do you run more pressure in your fork, or same, just lock it out?
Generally just lock it out because it's actually, I mean, for the whiskey crit, it's nice to have a little bit of give just because there's some like some gutters and like some stuff like that. So it's actually kind of nice to have it. Even if it's locked out, it still moves a little bit, which isn't terrible. So I just leave it. That way you're not messing with it. I just lock it out and run it that way, and it's fine. That way it doesn't bob and doesn't move.
Nice.
And then with tire pressure, we run, I think I was running 30, 35. So not super hard. It's nice to have the tire still somewhat forgiving. You know, like it is such a high volume tire that you don't really need to run like 80, right? So
right. Yeah.
Nor I'm sure that probably wouldn't be safe on mountain bike wheels. So
I'm sure. Yeah, that makes sense. What nutrition did you use for this? You're a GU athlete, right?
Yep.
So what nutrition, actually, before we get to the nutrition, what spares did you carry and what tools and how'd you carry them with you?
Yeah. So it's always like, a bit of a gamble. Like, I don't want to carry a tube. Like, don't want to carry all this stuff. But, in the end, like, it's not that much weight to carry. I use a 27.5 tube because it's a bit lighter.
Oh, really?
So, yeah.
And then you just you'll plan on stretching that out, I guess.
They stretch right in just fine. That's what they work just great.
That's a clever move. I hadn't heard about that. Yeah, it saves space too. So, it's a lot smaller tube.
Exactly. I mean, 29 tubes are big, and I think the 27.5 tube is, in a way, it's a better option than running a super lightweight 29 tube maybe. Or I've never had a problem stretching them in. It's really not that much, but it does save quite a bit of space.
And you're just looking to get away with it. Weight. Like it would be like something you put in, just to get you through the race. It's not something you'd use long term anyway. So
no, yeah, exactly. And I mean, it's more or less just to get you to the finish as quickly as possible. And I mean, in a way, the tube is like a really big backup option anyway, because I would air the tire plugs first, and if those fail, then you're going for the tube, and hopefully you have enough CO2 left. So, and normally you gotta make that call. You're like, all right, am I gonna plug this, or am I gonna just toss the tube in and be done with it? Like, you gotta kind of decide. So
yeah, how many CO2s do you carry with you in a race like this?
Either 2 small ones or a big air.
Okay, and then what do you carry for tire plugs, and how do you carry those?
So I just carry the tire plugs. I use the little ones that look like little screwdrivers, and I just tape them to my my handlebars. And the Pro Tharsis Di2 bar actually has like these little like channels for the Di2 wires, so you can pop that thing up in the channel. It's almost like hidden.
Whoa, that's really nice. That's pretty cool.
So that way it doesn't roll around.
Yeah.
So I tape that to my bar on the left side, and I tape a quick link to the right.
Okay.
And then the tube is taped on the down tube down below the bottle cage. And then I also tape the multi-tool on top of the tube with a separate piece of tape. So if I need to get to the multi-tool, I can do that without having to take the tube off as well. So,
nice. And then
when you put the tape on, you fold the tape over at the end, so you have a little pull string.
That's clever. What type of tape do you use?
Just electrical tape, a lot of it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. It's nice and light that way. If you start adding a bunch of duct tape, it can get pretty heavy.
Duct tape's also like it sticks to your frame, and it's kind of hard to get off. And I always like to put the tube as low as possible, so I try to jam it down there by the bottom bracket, just because I don't like having a bunch of weight up by the saddle. Like, you can kind of feel it up there, and I'm not a huge fan of it. So
yeah, centralize your mass and bring it low. That makes sense.
Exactly.
So I guess nutrition then, what do you carry for nutrition on a race like this? And do you have any other clever tricks for that?
Yeah. So, for these races, if it's under like 4-ish hours, I just run off goos and chews, basically. I don't use any solid food. So I'll generally start with, since on Sunday there was a chance of rain, it was going to be a little iffy. I left the chews in the wrappers and just clipped the top of them so I could slide them out. But generally I'll empty the chews just directly into my pocket and just pull them out piece by piece, which I think is easier. But if it's going to be rainy, you don't want to do that, because then they kind of melt and they all just like stick together.
Sticky mess out there. Yeah.
Yeah. So I do that. And then I always carry, I put 2 gels in my pocket, I think, as well.
Okay.
And then the rest of the goos were taped to the lids of my bottles.
How does that work?
So I pre-rip them a little bit. Okay. So I rip them just a teeny bit, just enough. They're not leaking, right? Just enough so they pull off really easy. So I tape them to the lids of the bottles. And then when you grab the bottle, you can still put it in your cage, and you don't have to eat the goo right away. You can eat it whenever you want. But generally I like to eat it really like right away, because having it sitting there flopping it bugs me. Yeah. So it's good. So then it forces you to eat it, right? Because you see it and you're like, oh, I should eat.
Yeah.
So you eat it. And also I think you have all these fancy bikes, all these parts, you're trying to save weight. So it's like, why carry around like 5 or 6 goos that weigh like 50 grams a piece? And then it's also a reminder to eat, I think, like I just said, like you see it and you're like, oh, I'm going to eat it. So
that's smart. So do you tape them to the bottle, or do you like thread the cap on and squeeze them that way?
I use electrical tape, and I tape them to the lid, right around the top.
Nice.
I'll do a few tight wraps, and that way the goo just rips straight off. You can rip it off in the cage. You can pull the bottle out and rip it off, whatever works for you. But I've had problems. I used to screw them into the lid until I had a lid blow off, and I was done doing that. So.
Then you lose the drink and the goo. Yeah.
Then you lose the drink and the goo, and then you have a mess. And yeah. And then, in the bottles, I ran goo hydration mix in every other bottle.
Okay.
And water in the others. So.
Gotcha. So you kind of alternate. You do like bottle of mix, bottle of water.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense. And you had 2 bottle cages on this bike.
No.
Just one?
It fits 2, but I was just running 1. So
nice.
We had it sorted out with, just to save weight. And we figured out that we weren't really going to need to ever really carry 2 bottles at a time, just the way the water and feed stations were spaced, that it worked out just fine to run 1. So if it was 100 degrees, maybe I would have carried 2.
Yeah.
But given that it was cool, and we're like, we'll just send it with 1 and hopefully it'll be fine. And it worked out just great.
A bottle's a lot of weight. That makes sense.
They do. They weigh a lot. So I think if like people don't realize that a bottle weighs probably about a pound if it's full.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that makes a big difference when you're climbing 8,000 feet. So I think if you can minimize the amount of bottles and goos and all that stuff, it adds up, so.
Yeah.
As long as you make sure that you get it, you don't want to start off the race with 1 bottle and 2 goos and be like, all right, I'm going to make it 5 hours. You got to have a plan. But
yeah. What was that plan for you? Like, how did you make sure that you brought or took in food regularly or enough?
So in the past, I've set a timer on my dash for every 20 minutes. And that kind of ingrained the habit. And now it's just become habit. Surely you can't do it every 20 minutes exactly, depending on terrain, right? But if your timer goes off and you're in somewhere where you can't drink, like, all right, I'll drink next time I get an opportunity, or I'll smash down a goo real quick or whatever. And that really helped me. Because I didn't used to be that good at eating when racing. And I think having that reminder to saying like, eat was really helpful. So,
yeah, that's something that I see like with you or just, riding with any of the top level athletes like this. I tend to see that you guys are really, really good at eating. That's like something that we misunderstand is you're just really good at remembering when to eat, finding moments to eat, eating efficiently, just like getting it done quickly. And that's something that us average Joes are actually not very good at.
It takes a lot of time, and even training, like you have to train your body to be able to like process that amount of carbohydrate. So like on a long, like 4 or 5 hour day, you're just like constantly like bringing in the calories and like, just getting used to eating on the bike. And sure, training, I eat more solid food, but you're still eating, right? Nonetheless. And you're teaching yourself how to reach back there, whether it's on single track, whatever, you just got to get comfortable, smashing food down. And yeah. And sometimes with the chews, I forgot to mention, I generally just pop my mouth and let them kind of dissolve. I don't really end up chewing and swallowing them. So
that's clever.
I'll take like 1 bite and then you just cheek them or something and
right.
Kind of let them do their thing. So.
That's clever.
I'm sure my dentist hates it, but it's all right.
I'm sure, right? Morning of, what did you have for breakfast that morning before the race?
So I woke up about 3 hours before the race, and then I made pretty good sized stacked pancakes with maple syrup, banana, a little bit of yogurt. That's kind of my go-to race meal. Sometimes I'll have rice if the race is in the afternoon.
Okay.
But I like to keep it relatively simple, like not really much protein, not a ton of fat, just a little bit. Mainly just carbohydrate. So
nice. Okay.
And simple carbs. Like I don't really like to do oatmeal. I don't think oats digests quite as quick. So I like to keep it like, white pancakes, white rice, just basic. So
yeah. And then how far out is that before the race?
2.5 hours.
2.5 hours. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right. I guess with that, we kind of have the scene set. What clothing did you choose to use? So you guys ride for Ossos, which is a bit unique because I think most teams don't really have as many options, I guess, for like clothing.
Yeah.
You guys have
we're pretty spoiled.
Yeah.
Ossos is awesome.
What did you end up using in this case?
So, man, it was kind of hard. I mean, it was really, it was stormy and like it looked like it might get really bad. And we found like a weather forecast for Marlet Lake and it was like 40 degrees for the high for the day. And we were like, well, we're going to be up there at like 10, 11 a.m. So it's not even be there.
Yeah.
So I ended up carrying a light jacket. Like it's super like fist size jacket in my pocket.
Okay.
And I was going to race with a jersey and a base layer. And then last minute, I decided to ditch the short sleeve and just run a fairly heavyweight long sleeve jersey. Not like a thick thermal one, just like a very, kind of medium weight.
Right.
Which I think was the right call, because I did the stage race in Spain earlier this year and it was really cold. And there was a couple days where I froze and I really regretted not having more warm clothes with me. And I don't do well when I get cold. I just shut down. I can't race fast. I can't descend well, get shaky, and it's not good. So I think from there on out, I always err on the warm side. So I'd rather be too hot and start sweating and overheat than be too cold. So,
right. That makes sense.
And it worked well. I mean, I got a little warm in a few places. All I had to do was unzip it because I just had a light base layer underneath, so it cooled off pretty quick and never got cold. So,
Nice, man. So I guess we should probably explain the course at this point. I'll go ahead and run through the course, basically what it is. So this is a 50-mile race. These events usually have a 15, 35, and 50-mile variant or something roughly close to that for amateurs. But then the pros just race the 50-mile one. The pro men and women race the same course, equal prize money too, which is cool. But I guess neither here nor there in this case. But the course starts out in downtown Carson City. And then you have some pretty steep fire road climbing just when you get out of town. There's like a neutral rollout. You hit that. Then there's a section of single track where you climb for a good amount of time, descend for a short period of time. A long fire road called Kings Canyon Road. That will be important in our discussion here in just a bit. And then you continue climbing on fire road-ish Jeep trail stuff for quite a while up to Marlette Lake where it gets really steep. And that's a lake above Lake Tahoe. Then you follow the single track, which is called Flume, the Flume Trail. It's really famous for its great views. You follow the Flume Trail to its junction point, and then you climb up all the way up to Marlette Peak on the Rim Trail. So I guess that's the only spot where it started to get a little bit more switchbacky and a bit more technical, I guess, on the climbing. And then fast single track descent into really flat, sandy fire road that kind of takes you. It's an old flume trail, so it can't be really steep. It just kind of follows a pitch that would let water gently, carry down. And that was like a TT section, basically. And then you dropped into single track back into Carson City. Had a little climb at the end, a little technical trail, but that's basically what it is. Then you have a run into the start-finish line. So I guess that it makes the most sense for us to go through this. And so I'm looking at I'm using performance analytics on TrainerRoad. So I'm just looking at your ride. It's been pulled in here from, like you said, you're using a Stages dash, and that just pushed up to Strava, and then it pulled right into here. So, so the interesting thing about this is that this race took you 3 hours and 33 minutes. And I think the fastest amateur I don't even know if they dipped below 4 hours.
It was 4:06.
4:06. Holy cow. Yeah. So nearly a half hour off of that. Your normalized power was 296, and you assume that around 4,500 feet, your FTP is roughly around 375, correct?
Give or take, yeah.
Yeah, around there, right? The average elevation for this course is closer to 6,500 feet. You spend a lot of time in the high country. So in this case, it wouldn't be uncommon to see your FTP, your actual effective FTP drop even lower for this in terms of what you could sustain for, somewhere around 365, even 360-ish, somewhere around there. So you had 296 for your normalized power, and for those counting, that's about 79% of his threshold is what he held for 3.5 hours. So that's insanely hard. That's a really hard effort. Average of 14 miles an hour. Once again, that's pretty darn fast, especially for the amount of climbing that we had with this race. And once again, remember, this is a mountain bike race. This isn't like a road race. 222 for your training stress on this, and you burned just under 3,500 calories. So a lot of calories. 50 miles ridden, somewhere around 6,000 to 6,500 feet of climbing. It's always a bit nebulous with GPS devices, but
yeah, they're all a bit different.
Yeah, lots of climbing to it. So I want to talk first about the start. Did you have a strategy going into this one, and did you end up making that happen?
Yeah. I guess the strategy for these races, it's always it's a neutral start. neutral in air quotes because it's always, you're still going pretty hard, right?
Yeah.
And then, so you want to try and just make sure you stay at the front and, or if you're out at the front, work your way up there. And then on this course, so basically once the neutral ended, the course slowly started to pitch up a bit. And it got pretty steep. Like, I don't know, what would you say? You raced it. It would have been...
It hurt. Yeah, I think
12, 13%.
Yeah, I
when
think
it started to kick up on the road.
Sections of sections, it's more like sustained 11 and then sections of 15.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of stair-steppy. So anyway, I didn't want to have like a full bum rush sprint into the single track. So I just went to the front and sat at, pretty comfortable, hard pace, 370, 380, enough to string it out and hopefully not more than 4 or 5 guys to be able to hang. So, luckily I had Howard, he joined in the party and made it even harder.
Yeah.
So I took the first pole in the front, and then Howard kind of came up next, and we were together on the double track, just riding pretty hard. And then he went to the front and pulled, and that was enough to shell off everyone except myself. Mm-hmm. So, then it was just him and I going into the single track.
Which is
initially
kind of what you prefer, I would assume, to be with a faster rider, because that's a lot of people rush to get into that situation. And looking at this, you averaged 375 watts for that first climb for 10 minutes. So, and that's a threshold effort, but you spent a significant amount of that time over threshold than just down into your sweet spot. So that's a really hard effort to start a 50-mile race.
Yeah.
And it's not something you could sustain. So I guess you were willing to gamble,
it's
though, right?
Kind of like a bit of you kind of have to. Because if you just say, "Oh, I'm just gonna sit at but at what percent ever X% of threshold for the first hour of the race, you're gonna be in 50th place." You have to you have to be willing to take that risk at the start and get yourself in a good position. And I think you also have to know yourself, right? You can't go way above your ability level, or let's say you're from sea level. You have to realize that hey, we're at 6,000 feet right now. I'm going to have to back it down a little bit and try and pass later, because the course did open back up. So everyone has their own strategy, and you want to put yourself in the best position for you. And I think, it's nice to be able to follow Howie, and it's hard, but I think it was the right call. Him and I had maybe a few seconds in the group behind, and they eventually caught back up. But it was nice to be able to ride. We just rode a steady tempo all the way up Ash to Kings Trail, and it's just follow. It was nice to follow him into the wind in some places, and so.
Yeah, the interesting thing about that is looking at the climb. I'm looking at it now. Your normalized power was, you said, 318, so well within your tempo range. But the crazy thing is, if you really start to look at it and you really start to get into the details, you went over your threshold 141 times on that climb, which is insane, right? So you would go over that threshold, you would spike out of every turn. But the big difference that I see in analyzing this compared to, for example, our CEO, Nate, his performance there on this section is that you would surge in the turns, it looks like, and then you would continue to stay, keep your power elevated. It wasn't like you just dropped off, coasted a bit. Really impressive.
So I think what we aim to do is you want to set, you want to keep it steady and as far as speed goes, right? So if you can carry momentum, if you're going to punch it out of the turn, you want to be able to carry that momentum through and just keep a steady pace. Otherwise that hard effort is more or less wasted if you just start coasting and rest fully. So you want to just kind of keep it steady and you're not sprinting out of the turns by any means. It's just kind of a hard acceleration, and it helps kind of keep the tempo rolling. So
that makes sense. So once you guys got done with that single track section and it opened back up to Fire Road, I know in our race, that was a Wild West moment again. Everyone felt like we were past the single track. Passing is now an option, and it was the race restarted again almost. Mm-hmm. What was the pace like when you guys got off of that single track? What did you guys end up doing? Was it an all-out, guns blazing sprint?
I think, I guess you'll be able to tell me exactly what we did, but so kind of what happened is you drop down a short descent, and then there was a little bit of a feed zone there. It wasn't really an official feed zone, it was just kind of a water station, I guess they called it. Mm-hmm. So most of us got bottles there. And then, Finsty, Russell Finsterwald and Ben Sontag joined Howard and I. And I took one pretty good pull at the front, and then Howard rolled up, and then he sat, I don't know, I feel like he was just kind of sitting around high tempo threshold for 8-10 minutes. And I really think that was like what gave us the gap. I think from there on out, like we just kind of maintained the rest of that fire road up when it just kind of, when it starts to roll, once the pitch ends. Cause I saw Cypress wasn't too far behind. And I think after that effort from Howard, he was out of sight. And I think that was kind of it. And then from there, once the pitch rolled over, we were taking turns at the front of it to keep the pace high across the flats.
You can actually see that too, where the pitch was initially steep and you can see that pull by Howie. Your power is super consistent and you're sitting there right like sweet spot to threshold, just tipping over threshold every once in a while, but like a really hard effort. I mean, you're looking at like 360 or 350 up to 390 watts, but you were just kind of hovering right around there. And then you can see where those pulls came in. By the top of that climb, you guys already had a 2-minute gap. Did that change did you know of that? Did that change your race strategy? Or, how did this section of climb, it ended up being super decisive. Did that change how you ended up approaching the rest of the race?
I mean, not really. I think for us, like it's worth, going back to those steeper, harder efforts earlier on, I think it's worth it to dig deep, and even if you have to float above threshold for a little bit and be like, all right, I'm going to pay for this later, but I have to stay on this train because we're rolling fast. And once you get over this climb, it's going to be a free ride, for a while. Free. So you're still you're still going to work hard, but in the end, I think it's worth it to make those efforts happen and stay on the wheel or on the train. Yeah. And then we didn't know how big our gap was. And so, we knew Kabush was back there, Ryan Standish. There are some fast dudes behind us, and old man Kabush, you can never count that guy out. So even if he's like 5 minutes back, he might catch you. So that's we just kept it fast. Howard and I actually, after the feed zone, you get back on that double track, climbing up to Marlet. That's Marlet Lake, correct?
Yep.
So climbing to Marlet Lake, it kind of stair steps up and it gets pretty steep. Howard put in some really good efforts there. And him and I actually separated from Ben and Russell again. And then I went to the front on the Flume Trail, to try and just keep the pace high across a single track and hopefully increase or maintain the gap we had after the Marlet Lake climbs.
So what was, if I can ask really quick on your motivation there. So there's that super steep little pitch when you're getting up to Marlet Lake, and it looks like you actually stayed within yourself. You didn't do an all out sprint there.
It wasn't an all out sprint. I think we were, it's probably right around threshold, maybe tipping up to 400, a bit more at the top, but.
This highlights an interesting point, these steep sections on the course. For most people, you're going to be at 400 watts or more, right? Because you're a light rider at 142 pounds probably on this day. So if you're riding it around 370 to 400 watts, and that's within range, heavier riders going to be riding at way higher wattage. And you have the virtue, it's a hard-earned virtue of having a higher threshold, so that doesn't throw you that far for a loop, right? It's not outside of your capabilities. So this speaks to having a higher threshold. You can be as light as you want, but within a certain point, having a higher threshold is helpful. When you went to the Flume Trail though, that's a single track that's just kind of, it's not technical. It's just kind of fast, I guess, and flat. Did you want to move to the front there because you I know you're a very good descender. Is that what you were thinking? I can carry a better pace maybe through this section?
Yeah. And I thought with me leading, we could carry a faster pace than with Howard leading. And because Howard's a good descender, we need someone to follow. So I was like, all right, we'll keep it pinned. And I hadn't ridden the Flume Trail though. So it was also a benefit to me to be in the front because I really didn't exactly know what's coming. So, but I knew it was relatively, there wasn't a whole lot to it aside from that one walk-a-bike section.
Right.
So then that, just kind of kept it smooth. And I tried to just stay, right around tempo all the way across. And a lot of people had told me that, the Flume Trail is a relatively nice place to rest. And I was after riding it, I was that was not rest. It was tempo all the way across. Yeah. And I think that's because it was sandy and there was a bit of a wind. So you had to in order to keep the flow, you had to keep pedaling quite hard. So
yeah, it's a pedally section of trail. And it shows that too. you were constantly pedaling. The only times you dropped down, it looks like, are when you had that walk-a-bike section and then that other section with the tight pinch between some rocks. But
yeah, had to kind of hop around there.
yeah. So. Other than that, that's basically, you were on the gas the whole time. Now, afterward was the section of climb that, looking at amateurs' rides, I saw the most time bled in this next section. And it was basically like a steep little fire road climb that then led into a long single track climb up the Tahoe Rim Trail up to Marlette Peak. I actually kind of guessed that Howard Grotz would try to attack after the Flume Trail going up.
That was
what happened?
Too. So he actually flatted on the Flume Trail. Because I had a feeling he was going to attack there. And I was hoping that I'd be able to stay with him. And then, or if not, just keep him within 20, 30 seconds and hopefully bring him back on the descent. That was kind of that was my original thought going in. But he'd flatted somewhere along the Flume Trail. I didn't know what had happened. Next thing I looked back and Howard wasn't there. And I was like, oh, he must have flatted or dropped a chain or whatever. So I was solo through the feed zone, and I looked at the profile but I hadn't ridden that section of climbing all the way up to the top, and I didn't really know exactly how much climbing was left before the descent. So I just kept it steady, but hard. I mean, hard enough that I had a feeling that Howard would probably catch back on, assuming something catastrophic didn't happen. And he eventually did. And I think he did end up kind of bringing Ben and Russell with him. And I could see Russell was kind of yo-yoing up the switchbacks a little bit. So I just tried to keep the pace high and hopefully they wouldn't quite close the gap down to me. So then over the top, it was just Howard and I, and we had no idea how far behind Ben was. We couldn't see him, but Ben's also a pretty good descender. So and that descent's it's so twisty and turny. It's hard to really open it up, I guess, a whole lot. I think it's if you're a good descender, everyone's going to ride the same speed to a certain extent, I think.
Yeah. So on the climb section, that's the only section where I heard people kind of complaining about technical issues, right? Like in the sense that it got technical and it outpaced a lot of amateurs' abilities, I guess. I think a lot of that, the climb maybe in a vacuum, isn't that tough, right? But then when you add on all the climbing you've done plus the elevation, it gets a whole lot harder.
Yeah.
Was that section difficult for you guys? And if so, how'd you negotiate any of the obstacles that were tough for you? I mean, you hadn't pre-rode it, so it was kind of new.
Yeah. I mean, I think ironically it's kind of a bit backwards for me. It was nice to have a bit of a technical climb where you it wasn't just full throttle, you were kind of turning and popping around rocks, and you had to be a little more on your toes. And I think that was kind of a nice change of pace after just bleeding out your eyes at fire roads all day. So
right.
It was for me, it was kind of nice. I mean, I think because there was kind of you can only go so fast, right? And just putting down more power doesn't necessarily mean you're going to go faster.
Some interesting
points. It was a good change.
Yeah, like you said, you have more variability between your normalized and average power in that section than any other section through there. The descents are different, but than any other climb, and that's a smart point. Is that you're able to coast a little bit more, or not coast, but you're able to break things up, and you're kind of forced to, I guess, with those rocks.
The efforts, those little punchy efforts you're putting in might be hard. They might be a fair bit above threshold, but you're also getting the zero pedaling between some of them, which I think makes a big difference. Even just 5 seconds of coasting is enough to drop your heart rate a bit. And I think all those little bits add up, and it's just a different effort as opposed to sitting at threshold and just grinding away. You're kind of more spiky, kind of on off punchy power, which was a good change of pace. So
yeah, another interesting point with this is looking at your performance compared to that of an amateur. You spent 24 minutes of your 3 hours and 33 minutes of this race coasting. So if you think about that, that's a lot of time coasting, right? But then that said, you had a lot of descending, of course. You climbed and you descended a lot. When you look at our CEO Nate's time that he spent coasting, so he did it in 5 hours, and you look at his time coasting, it was over an hour, or almost an hour and a half. I think an hour and 25 minutes of coasting time, right? That he spent coasting on this course. So like you said, coasting for you guys is pretty rare. So anytime you can take it, there is a noticeable advantage, and it does add up. Definitely.
Yeah. And even on the descent, I mean, you're pedaling out of every corner. You're just pedaling everywhere more or less. So it's it's nice to get those little breaks.
One other insight that I see from this is the fact that, granted the race was getting harder and it was getting toward the top, but you can really see the effect of elevation, and you can see that your power was higher in the beginning. And then as you go higher in elevation, the peaks don't get quite as high, and kind of the valley, so to speak, gets a little bit lower. So you can absolutely see the effect of elevation. You live at 4,500 feet, but most of your training, or I guess 5,000 feet probably, most of your training.
I think I'm at 55. So.
And then most of your training's up from there, right? Like you don't train down in elevation.
No, we train anywhere from, I'd say most of the time, like if it's a road ride, most of it's right around 6 to 65. And there's a few, obviously, if we go over Empire Pass or whatever, you get up around 8 or 9. But, and the mountain bike rides are probably a little more. My average is probably right around 75 for mountain bike rides. So
in that case, I guess you might have a skewed perspective because a lot of people, you're used to elevation, but do you find that you have to rein it in at elevation, or like you can't go too far into the red and because it's like slower to recover? That's what most people find. But with you spending so much time at elevation, do you feel like that's even an issue?
I mean, I think, yeah, to a certain extent, like you have to realize how high you are and be like, you still can do those hard efforts, but you have to realize like how many, you can only do so many of them and you can't go quite as deep. I mean, obviously living at elevation, you have a bit of an advantage just with the physiological side of things. But I do think a lot of it is just knowing how to race to elevation. I think a lot of people don't understand that. And it just takes time. Like you can acclimate and be like fully ready to go. But if you don't understand how your body works and where to, do your efforts and like, all right, I'm gonna have time to recover here. And like, you just have to know how to pace yourself. And I think that's a really big piece that's underestimated, is just like pacing and knowing what you're capable of, whether you're from elevation or not. Like I think everyone can race elevation. It's just like knowing how to do it. So yeah, I think that's a really big piece.
Looking at the descent thereafter, this is another interesting point to me that I see you doing. This is different than an amateur. So most of the amateurs, I see them descending and then I see coming out of turns. It's actually not that hard of a hit coming out of every turn. But it looks like you guys actually had some really hard hits. In fact, at one point, it looks like you were surging, well up above like it's 600 watts even, coming out of one of those turns, maybe something like that. When you're descending the pros in a single track section like that, is it really hard coming out of every turn?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on who you're descending behind and what the descent's like and what your aim goal is. I mean, if you're in a group and you're just kind of cruising along, you want to try and limit those hard efforts. But if you like want to try and put time into somebody or try and maintain a gap that you have or whatever, yeah, you have to hit it pretty hard out of every turn to keep the momentum rolling. And it's not like an all out sprint, but it's a hard, like 10 to 20 second dig out of every turn. And those definitely add up as well. So you have to kind of be wary of that. Like I think people underestimate how hard descending is because you're like, oh, you're just going to coast downhill. But when you're trying to go fast, you have to go hard.
Yeah. So. And you had some seriously hard efforts in that single track descent. After that, you dropped down into that kind of flat road section, Tanks Road. You were in a group of 3, I guess, with maybe
it was just Howard and I.
Okay, so just you two.
Yeah.
How did you approach that?
Ben didn't catch us until halfway down that.
Okay. So did you guys try to like pace line, and was your goal to extend the lead, or were you just trying to be conservative?
Yeah, I mean, initially, like I hadn't ridden this section either, but I knew the road was coming. And my impression was that it was going to be an actual road that you could pace line on and like really put time into a solo rider. But it turns out it was so sandy and so rocky, and also it was kind of foggy and your vision was a bit limited. So it didn't matter one bit whether you were solo or with a group, because drafting was kind of irrelevant. You couldn't really follow close enough to the person in front of you to get any draft. So, I mean, in hindsight, had I known that, it would have changed my tactics of the race a bit. But I was like, going into it, Howard and I, if we're together, we can put in some solid time into Ben, and hopefully Ben and Russell were separated. That was our thinking.
Right. So had you been able to draft, how would you have changed that? Or I guess, had you known that you wouldn't be able to draft like this, how would you have changed your strategy? Would you have attacked and gone harder, or
So going in the last feed zone before that steep 2-track climb and the technical single track climb we were talking about, had I known we wouldn't be able to draft at all, I would have just gone all in on that climb and all the way up. Cause I just kind of kept the pace we were going. And I was like, all right, well, Howard will probably catch back up. Then also I want to work with on the road, and then we can put some solid time. And cause I was like, well, if I'm solo on that road, I'm going to get caught by that group of 3 for sure. Right. Like no doubt. It was without doubt in my mind that I was going to get caught on that road. So I was like, I'm not going to blow this. I'm not going to go all in here, blow myself up, and then not have anything left for the sprint. Cause it was going to be a sprint again if we came down to that group of 3 or 4. So, I mean, in hindsight now, I was like, oh, well, I should have just like gone all in and tried to put, even if I could have gone over the top with 20 seconds on Howard, I might have been able to extend that on the descent, and I hung it loose a bit. So I think, then I would have just been full time trial mode on that road, and everyone else would have been time trial as well by themselves. So I think it would have changed things a bit. But hindsight's always 20/20. So
isn't it?
But that's something I'll be like kicking myself for a while. But it is what it is. So
I guess the importance of course recon, right?
And just conditions. Maybe if it was sunny, maybe a draft would have been better. But like it was so foggy, we had this like weird fog wind rolling up over the side, and like you couldn't see anything. Like you were just sending it down the sandy fire road with rocks and stuff. And it was, different conditions. So there was a lot that played into that.
When Ben caught you, were there any tactics involved? Did you then ask Ben to move to the front and take poles, or did he just sit on?
He just sat on. He had a teammate behind him, so he wasn't keen to pull at all. So I basically led the entire descent, hoping that I might be able to shake one or two of like Howard or Ben. One or the other would have been nice. But the descent, there's not a whole lot to it, and it's fairly pedally. So you're and there's no big climbs left either after that fire road. So we were going quite fast down the sandy fire road. And I like a couple times I'd maybe have like a few bike lengths, maybe like 5-8 seconds, but it would just come back together. And so there wasn't really a whole lot you can do. So that was kind of my tactic, was like, maybe if I push them hard enough, they'll make a mistake, or like they'll flat, or because that was all. I was like, well, it's either me, it's either like I'm going to have to risk it on this descent, or it's going to be another sprint. So I might as well try and take some risks, and maybe someone will make a mistake, because that's kind of all you can. Of course, you don't hope anyone has a huge crash or anything, but you put a foot down, it'll slide out, like. And all it takes is that 10-15 second gap, and then you're gone. So
and it's open, and then you're gone.
So it looks like strategy.
It looks like you were picking up, like the wattage started picking up a lot too around then. Like it was much more surgy once you got down to the lower portion of that descent and kind of wrapped into single track. There was like at the final portion of single track, or I shouldn't say the final portion of the race, but toward the end there was a section called the Creek Trail. And on that one, you guys actually extended a pretty big gap over what I would see from most of the amateurs. Like you went through that pretty fast. That's a trail with like a lot of limited sight. And I find it hard for a lot of riders to follow somebody close in those scenarios. Are there certain things that you do when you're following somebody extremely close like that to keep yourself more steady, or allow yourself to better hold their wheel? Like, do you intentionally let little gaps open up in different places? Do you look ahead of them? How do you stay on that wheel in tight line of sight?
Luckily I was leading that section, so I didn't have to worry about that.
Oh, nice.
Kind of back to your question. It really depends on who you're following, honestly. And the type of rider they are, and like whether they've ridden that terrain or not. Like if it was Jeff Kabush, for example, I was following, I wouldn't want to give him an inch. Like I would stay basically as close as comfortably possible. Because Jeff's a really good descender, and he probably has ridden that trail more than most of us. Right. But if you're following a rider that hasn't ridden it, you might want to give them a touch more of a gap, just in case they make a mistake, or they put the front wheel off. You have time to react, or you have time to get around them, so you want to, really depends on who you're following, how comfortable you are following them close. Like most of these guys, like we all know really well, and I'm pretty comfortable following any one of these guys at speed. So it really depends. But if it's someone you have no idea, you're like, oh, I'm going to give them a little more space, and I can probably just roll up onto them. Like as long as you keep them within sight and keep them in check, like all is good. So really, there's a lot of different strategy that goes into that. And then really depends on the trail too. There's so many, like so many variables.
when you guys, at this point you came through that creek trail, there was a short climb back up and then a really fast single track descent into the road. At what point did you realize that it was indeed just going to be a sprint? And then how did you change your tactics?
I knew it was going to be a sprint from Tanks Road all the way down, unless I could make something happen on the descent. That was like my gut feeling. I was like, well, basically the whole way down, I was like, how am I going to try and win this race? Because I just had a feeling it was going to be a sprint, and I was like, this is what it's going to be.
Yeah.
So basically then, like you said, once we knew for sure it was going to be a sprint, then it was like, well, the other thing was, Russell was not far behind. I looked back on, so what was that? The descent before you hit the road, before you hit Creek Trail.
Yeah, it's called.
You look back and you're going through some of the valleys. I could see Russell back. He was maybe 15, 20 seconds. Yeah. So I both Howard and I had quite a bit of motivation to keep him distant. So I led the whole descent, was just trying to keep as fast as possible. And then we hit the pavement. I was like, well, I'm not in the overall. Howard has the most to gain by keeping time on Russell. So we'll let him go to the front. And Ben, it was his teammate. So he just sat on the back.
As he should, right?
As he should, as expected. I didn't expect him to pull or do any work. So he sat in there, and little did we know Russell had crashed. So it really didn't matter anyway.
Yeah.
Luckily he's fine and didn't hurt himself, but it wouldn't have mattered. We could have just played cat and mouse all the way into town and we wanted to, but
and it looks like that cat and mouse stuff didn't start until the end of it. I guess the end of that stretch coming into town. Yeah. Because it looks like there was some surgy stuff that almost, I don't know if you were like rolling pace lines together for a bit, or like you were taking turns at the front with Howie, but it looks like things really kind of got down to like brass tacks once you got really close into town, close to the finish. It looks like you had some efforts that were, really hard, like 1,200, 1,300 watts. How did you decide when you should go? Two different guys. You beat Howie in a sprint this year, but Ben's a really big rider, so maybe he has a better sprint. How'd you decide? Yeah,
I'd never sprinted against Ben, so I really had no idea how good of a sprinter he was, and I didn't want to let him lead it out. Basically all the way into town, Howard just rode just kind of mid-tempo, and he's a pretty small rider, so I'm still doing, he's tuck. He was as arrow as he possibly could be. So
you're not getting a draft.
I'm getting a draft, but it's not a huge draft. So it wasn't that hard. It was just enough to keep Russell from really putting a whole lot of time into us. And then the cat and mouse kind of started there was a right-hand turn, and then there's a couple 100 meters. Then there's a left-hand turn, 100 meters, right-hand turn, 100 meters finish. So the cat and mouse started before basically the second to last right-hand turn. And I can't remember who ended up in the front, whether I don't know. It was just, we were just going really slow and just kind of, messing about. And I figured that if I was the first one into the left-hander, that I'd pretty much have it locked up.
That's not the last turn, but that's like a turn.
It's a second to last turn. Yeah. Second to last turn. There's only 100 meters, and then there's a right-hand turn, and then the finish line's right there.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, if I go into this turn first, I should have it covered, done. Right. So Howard put in one pretty good sprint. And that was probably the first 1,200 watt surge because we followed Howard. And then once that effort kind of ended, I hit it really hard. And I made it into the first turn, that left-hander first. And I kept it tight so Ben couldn't sneak past me on that one, because I actually lost a preem because Fernando snuck by me on the inside of that turn. I was like, lesson learned.
Yeah.
So I went on the inside there, just barely almost clipping the curb, making the left. But Ben had gone wide on that turn and was on my inside going into the next right-hander. So that's when he snuck by me. I was like, so what I should have done is gone inside and then immediately aimed to the inside of the next turn to keep Ben from passing me and cover my inside a little more.
Yeah.
But he was right on my wheel, and he was able to just give it a little punch and sneak by the inside. Then I was like, I'll swing wide in the next right-hander and then try and slingshot around him. But the finish was right there, and I swung a bit too wide, and that was it. So, and I guess I didn't know, but he had won a sprint with Russell and Todd Wells 2 years ago there in exactly the same situation. So he knew exactly what to do. I was like, this is I'm pretty good at a drag, a straight shot finish.
Right.
but these turns they had me, I was thinking about it all the way in. I was like, how am I going to win this sprint? Like, this is so weird having this left-hander, right-hander.
Yeah.
So I in my head, I was like, oh, left-hander first, game over. But it turns out that wasn't the case. But
you still,
it was good.
You still put out almost a 1,400 watt sprint, which is really impressive considering all the work you'd already done. And there were numerous sprints leading up to that. Some of the biggest things that I see too on this, when you look at just your overall ride, you look at how much time that you spent in different zones. You spent way more time in threshold, VO2, and anaerobic zones than most riders that I see, at least with their data on this. So, looking at how much time you spent there, you spent 7% of your time in that race, or 7.5% in the anaerobic power zone, which is a lot. Like, if you think about it, it's quite a lot. Mm-hmm. Then 6.5% VO2 max, 10% of your time was in threshold, 8 and about just shy of 9% was your sweet spot time. So not a whole lot. With racing, there isn't a whole lot of sweet spot stuff, right? But then if you look at it, you spend a lot of time in tempo, 18%, and then 20% in endurance. And that's kind of the nature when you see a mountain bike power file, you'll see more time spent in endurance and that sort of thing, because that's basically, when you're kind of just easing off into a single track turn or into like a tight switchback descent, that sort of thing, you start to see them higher. But you
can't go any harder. In single track, you're forced to just ride an endurance pace anyway sometimes. So
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So the interesting thing is that, and then you also see you have more time in active recovery. So basically you have like weighted ends in terms of the percentage. You spend a lot of time coasting, a lot of time in active recovery and endurance, and then you spend a lot of time in anaerobic VO2 max and threshold. Whereas if you look at a lot of the amateur riders, they spend a more middle weighted section, if you will. So they spent more time around those, tempo zones, endurance a bit, but then looking at sweet spot, they spent their time there. If you look at almost every amateur's ride, they started extremely hard, like way harder than they should have. Like your race, your start was hard, but it was within your limits. In fact, you average your threshold in the beginning and the end of it. So versus a lot of amateurs went way harder than they should have. So it's kind of interesting to see. I think that a 50-mile mountain bike race, you can see how different that pacing ends up being than something that's just like a super short race. And that's something that a lot of mountain bikers, I feel like, forget. They end up just going out of the gun hard because it's a mountain bike race, and they pay the price for 50 miles thereafter, right? So
yeah, these races always start hard. Like even threshold, you have to make sure you're fully warmed up, like ready to give it, because you really don't. Someone's going to go hard, whether it's you or someone else. Someone's going to make you hurt, so you might as well be the one trying to make it hurt sometimes. So
yeah, no doubt. Well, thanks, Keegan. I appreciate it, man.
Yeah.
We were able to go through a bunch of stuff, get a lot of insights. I guess, where can people find out more about your team and you on the internet?
Yeah. So we actually have a team newsletter that goes out a couple times a month. You can sign up for that on the Stands Pivot website. Okay. And then I have, my own website, which I'm terrible about updating, but I do have one. And then probably the best is Instagram, though. I'm pretty good about updating Instagram and keeping everyone up to date as to what's going on there. So That's just Kegels99. So.
Awesome. Yeah, you can search that through.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, everybody. If you want to find out more about this, you can go to blog.trainerroad.com, and we'll have a full write-up on this performance so we can learn how to be faster mountain bikers. If you want more information on what we do here at TrainerRoad, go to trainerroad.com, and you can see how to train efficiently and train like a pro. So, Keegan, I appreciate your time. We'll chat soon.
All right. Have a good one.